Gentlemen, please welcome Ira Rubenstein, Senior Vice President and General Manager of PBS Digital.
Thank you very much. I'm Ira, and I'm thrilled to be here today with you all. You just saw some of the great content from the Digital Studios team. We just had our new front presentation in New York City last week, where PBS was very well received. If you didn't know, Digital Studios is working today with over 25 stations, helping to create great content for this new platforms. In the great tradition of how PBS helped to figure out what smart TV was 50 years ago, we are together figuring out what smart quality content is for this platform today. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, the son of 2 educators and a PBS family. In fact, my mother's travel agency was a local sponsor of the PBS station for the EastEnders show. And during the pledge drive, her office would man the phones. Which leads me to a story that I believe is relevant for today. It's about the power of great content. You see, back in 2002, I got a call from my mom. She had since retired from Minnesota to San Diego, and she told me her computer was acting up. So I went over, and I looked at her computer, and I noticed that she had downloaded this program called Kazaa. Now, for those of you who don't know what Kazaa was, it was the video version of Napster, a peer-to-peer network to share video over the internet. You see, my mom is a huge EastEnders fan, more like a fanatic. And when her friend in Minnesota had stopped sending her the VHS tapes of the show airing on TPT, she found out from her friends online, her EastEnders fans, that she could download these episodes by just going to this little website. Yes, my mother at 70 years old was an internet pirate. Of course, I told her that was wrong and it was stealing. But in my mom's defense, in her mind, to her it was the same as someone else recording the show and just sharing a tape. That taught me a very powerful lesson about content in the digital age. I learned that if we didn't legally offer content to consumers on these new platforms, they would figure out how to get it on their own, even at 70. Our viewers, our supporters, are now their own programmers. You've heard it before. They want what they want, when they want it, and where they want it. That's our challenge today. Together, we need to navigate these changing times. And together, we need to figure out how we engage our audience on their terms. I know the more we can engage our supporters on their terms with great content and services and products, the more they will reward us with their financial support. So today, rather than go into a presentation about all the great work that is going on at PBS Digital, and believe me, as the new guy, I am so impressed of what they're doing. I thought it'd be interesting to bring in someone from the outside who can talk to us about why we are doing everything we're doing, what is happening in the digital media space, and what he thinks will be happening in the next few years. It is therefore my pleasure to introduce my friend and my former colleague from Sony Pictures, Rob Tercek. Rob is a recognized digital thought leader and has been working with many media companies over the last several years, helping them navigate the ever-changing digital landscape. But before Rob comes on stage, here's a quick glimpse at a new campaign we've been working on in collaboration with the marketing team at PBS. This local spot can be used at your stations to let your local audiences know that they can find PBS anywhere they want it and on their terms.
What are you doing? possibilities. Your day is filled with them.
Reach up, energy at the fingertips, collapse.
TV, play Downton Abbey.
And PBS helps everyone discover theirs. Anytime, anywhere.
Up in the sky, you can see it.
PBS, we're with you for life.
Hello. Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. As I already mentioned to you, for many years, for about 25 years, I've been working with media companies to help develop their approach to the digital future, and we're about to see some tremendous changes happening here. I happen to believe that public media, public broadcasting, has a tremendous future ahead of it. I think these changes that are afoot, they're going to affect the commercial broadcasters in some very exciting ways, sometimes some very scary ways. But I don't necessarily think those dynamics are going to disfavor public TV. They may actually end up favoring public television. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak to you today. But you know, when Juan Sepulveda and Ira reached out to me and they asked me to come in and talk about the future of TV, I said, well, I'm a little bit nervous. I have some trepidation about this because right now it's hard to make predictions about the future of the TV business. There's three big decisions happening that in the next couple of months are going to transpire, and we're going to find out what happens on the other side of these decisions, that they could reshape the media landscape in the United States permanently. I'm referring to, of course, the big Supreme Court decision about Aereo. If it goes in Aereo's favor, that could spell the end of retransmission fees and that whole scheme that has helped the commercial broadcasters make tremendous amounts of profit, billions of dollars of profit. That could go away if that court case is decided in Aereo's favor. Of course, it might not be. In a court case, if the court case goes the other way, well, then that could affect the future of all the emerging cloud services, which right now are some of the fastest growing digital services in the world. So it's very hard to predict that outcome. It could go either way. There are other big changes afoot too, these other big decisions. Right now, the FCC has issued sort of a preliminary indication of new rules about net neutrality. And this has the whole internet crowd up in arms. There's a furor around these rules because they perceive it as a very thinly guided attempt to recreate pay television or recreate cable TV on the internet by creating fast lanes. So that's controversial, and we'll see some of the controversy around that play out over the course of the summer. And finally, no one has failed to notice that there's also a big merger in the works right now. It's seeking regulatory approval between the world's largest media company, Comcast, and they'd like to acquire the second biggest cable company, Time Warner Cable. This, of course, will create a colossus, and on its own could determine how about a third of American households reach the internet as well as pay television. It could also certainly could have some unexpected consequences for the internet companies that have to pass through those cables to get to the homes. So there's quite a bit of concern about this, and we're hearing some arguments on both sides of the matter. And then quietly in the background, AT&T is making a play right now for DirecTV, just in case nobody's paying attention. It's a very good time for them to move for that. So we have these three huge things happening right now, and it's very hard to predict the future of TV. It reminded me of the old quote from Sam Goldwyn, the movie mogul, who said, "Never make forecasts, especially about the future, because you could be wrong." And in fact, in history, a lot of the people who you would expect to be really the best informed have made some tremendous blunders when they predict the future. For instance, Thomas Edison said the phonograph has no commercial value at all. And what I love about this is he's the guy who invented the phonograph. He was deaf in one ear. I suppose that's why there was only one horn on that phonograph. He didn't really appreciate stereophonic sound, couldn't envision a business of recorded music. When Harry Warner heard about sound, talking pictures, he said, "Who the hell wants to hear an actor talk?" I love this. They responded quickly, though, of course, with Vitaphone and came out with successful talking pictures a year later. And Daryl Zanuck, one of the greatest movie producers of all time, dismissed television outright. He said, "TV won't last because people will get tired of staring at a plywood box every single night." He didn't think it would last. And we've been hearing that story for many, many years from other businesses that don't look so kindly upon television as kindly as we do. My advice to you today is think twice. When you hear an expert stand on a stage and tell you about the future of TV, think twice about it, because they might not really know what they're talking about. There's this meme going around on the internet, this idea that the death of TV is imminent. You've probably seen some of these reports. There was a research report issued by Credit Suisse in 2011, and that researcher said if certain conditions happen, people might start unbundling, they might start unsubscribing, and that might lead to a demise of the TV business. But the word might got left out, and what happened is all the press, all the news bloggers on the internet, the so-called pundits, these self-appointed experts on TV, they started to report this idea, and it's been echoing around the internet for years since then about the death of TV. You can't kill it. There's no evidence to support it, but that idea has been out there, and it's been bumping around and keeps getting picked up. My advice is don't believe every single thing you read on the internet. It turns out that there is really no evidence to support this idea of cable cord cutting. The number of people unsubscribing from pay TV is actually small. There is a lot of churn, of course, as people switch from one platform to another, but that's not really leading to huge percentages of total loss of subscribers. By the way, the internet gets these stories wrong all the time. They report the death of all sorts of things pretty frequently, the death of consoles and so on. Here they reported the death of Wayne Knight, and that also was untrue. It makes me think of the old Mark Twain statement that the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. That's certainly true for TV. Television is not dying. I'm here to tell you that emphatically. TV is going to be around for a long time to come. Yes. Yes, it is. Thank you. Yes, it is. TV, in fact, is booming. It's doing fantastically well. So right now we're in the middle of the upfronts, as you're well aware, and we're expected to sell somewhere between $70 to $80 billion of advertising, and that's on top of another $75 billion of pay TV. It's a $150 billion ecosystem in the United States. Globally, the total TV ecosystem approaches about $400 billion. Pay television is expected to grow, not diminish. It should break the $400 billion figure by 2017 on a global basis. So TV is in robust health. We're enjoying better programming than ever, and more people are watching than ever. So our industry is actually in fantastic shape. I think there's three reasons why TV is going to continue in its present shape for quite some time. The first one is this ratio of 100 to 1. And when you have people telling you about the internet and the internet challenge to television, remember this number, 100 to 1. What I mean by that is research that was done by the folks who run the MIP-TV and MIPCOM conferences. They polled all the TV buyers around the world who come to their festivals to find out how much budget they had for original programming. And they discovered that this year, $100 billion will be spent on original programming. $100 billion will be spent globally on original TV programming. And if you take all the original programming for those internet services, those OTT services like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and so forth, and add it all up, it amounts to about $1 billion. So we're outspending the internet 100 to 1 on original programming. You know this, of course, already, because there's too many great shows on television for you to watch. In fact, you know, HBO's entire programming budget is greater than all the money that's spent on original programming on the web. So that's a pretty significant figure right there. That means that audiences are getting this tremendous benefit. And that goes to the second reason why I think TV is in great shape and will continue to be in great shape, which is that the pay TV bundle actually turns out to be economically the best value for the hour of time you spend in front of it. It's the best value by far for any type of entertainment. It compares favorably to games, it compares favorably to movies, and so forth. I don't think our friends in the cable and satellite business are particularly good at telling this story. I think they're kind of inept about it, but the message there really is that $80 a month that people are spending on pay TV is the most efficient entertainment spending that we do. And that's one of the reasons why people are not unsubscribing. On an intuitive level, people get that. They love to complain about cable, they love to complain about their bill, but the reality is we love watching television. There's one more reason why I think TV is in great shape, and that's that streaming video really is not ready for prime time. And we saw a great example of this just a few weeks ago when HBO Go showed the last episode of True Detective. It was an awesome show. People loved it. Lots of people wanted to check it out on the internet and on their tablets, and so they all came at the same time to watch the last episode of True Detective, that climactic episode. And what they saw was this circle spinning around because too many people hit the server at one time, and they simply couldn't serve all of those people at once. It kind of reminded me of that phrase, time is a flat circle, right, from that show. Well, yeah, it gives a new meaning to that phrase, time is a flat circle. That's the circle you're staring at while you're trying to wait for the show to load up on your tablet. So people took to Twitter, as they do. There are a lot of funny comments about this incident on Twitter. Here, somebody said that spinning buffer wheel is actually a secret code that spells out BitTorrent. The fact is, Americans love TV. It's our favorite habit. It's our favorite hobby. We love to watch television. So that's good news for everybody in this room. But TV is evolving. TV must evolve because there's some big changes happening. I'm going to argue today that our audience is changing and we need to change and adapt to them as well. The real question in my mind isn't, is TV being disrupted? You hear that phrase a lot. I think it's overhyped a little bit, this concept of disruption these days. The really interesting question to me is, why has it taken so long for the TV industry to feel the unbundling or disruptive impact of the internet? If you contrast it to the music business, the newspaper business, the magazine business, the book business, all of which we've seen these businesses drop by more than 50% in the last 10 years as the force of the internet has kind of unbundled their wares and dismantled their economic systems. Why hasn't that happened to TV? It turns out that the answer is there's these twin oligopolies that don't necessarily get along all the time. There's a little friction in this relationship between big media and their distributors, the MVPDs. But it works out very well. They have a lot of alignment of interests. After 40 or 50 years of collaborating, they've kind of figured out how their ecosystem works, and it's very well defended. I would argue that the American pay TV ecosystem is the best defended media ecosystem in the world. You see, the TV companies, the content providers, they have copyright rules that protect them. And they don't hesitate to use litigation to defend their copyright. That's exactly what's happening right now with Aereo. The technology companies look at that and they say, well, the TV companies, they're using copyright as a veto on innovation. That's how it's perceived in Silicon Valley. We also have favorable regulation, things like must carry and retransmission consent fees. Those are mandated by Congress. And then finally, the big media companies also have the ability to withhold their content from new services. That's called content lockout. So the content providers have all these tools at their disposal, and they don't hesitate to use them to protect their business, to preserve their business. And they're aided in this defense by the pay TV distributors, who have all these technical apparatuses that surround that content and make it difficult for people to unbundle, to unpick that bundle. So these are technologies like the set-top box and the screen guide and the channel slots that give the distributor control over who gets to access what content and where the content appears and so forth. And so these two things together have kept TV and kind of preserved it. I've worked for Tom Freston twice in my life. He's a great leader. And he said to me once, TV is a locked box exploding with cash. And I just love that image. It's a fun image to think about, but it also kind of explains why so many companies out there are trying to unpick the lock or pick the lock and try to get their hands on that cash. It is the single biggest area where advertising dollars are spent, and it's the single biggest area of media dollars in general. So of course, there's a lot of companies attracted to it who'd like to get a piece of that action. Now, anytime you have a closed ecosystem like that that's thriving so much, you sometimes get distorted economics. And I believe that the television industry right now is experiencing bubbles, the commercial television industry. The first one is the sports bubble, right? So we've just been through the worst recession in our adult lifetimes. And we really haven't entirely recovered as an economy. But throughout that period, the price of sports franchises has continued to go up. And even mediocre or failing sports clubs have seen their value go up tremendously in the last 5 years. And that's because the demand from the television ecosystem is so great. These are incredibly profitable franchises. We're also experiencing kind of bundling bubble. This is where a company that's acquired a number of channels and sells them in a package to a distributor can extract fees for channels that nobody's really watching. So if you consider a channel like MSNBC that really only gets an audience when there's an election going on, and even then it's not that big of an audience, they can still rake in $400 million a year in an off year. That's because of the economics of bundling. And so there's a kind of redistribution of wealth that occurs. My sense is that there's some inflation there as well. There's a bubble that's happening there as well. Some of those channels wouldn't survive in an unbundled world. I have no question in my mind that retransmission fees are a kind of bubble as well. When Congress passed the legislation for retransmission consent, at the time, during that debate, they never expected, this is around 1993, they never expected that the retransmission fees would exceed $2 billion. And generally, everyone thought it would be about $1 billion a year spent on that. But they felt $3 billion was an outrageous figure. Well, 2 years ago, we passed that $3 billion figure. And the big broadcasters have already made it known very clearly what their site is set on now is $12 billion a year in retransmission fees. So those fees will be passed along to consumers. And that will eventually cause more and more people to consider unbundling or unsubscribing from TV. So in a way, those retransmission fees are also a kind of bubble, and that bubble might bust. And finally, there's an advertising bubble. My friends in broadcast TV disagree about this. We debate it all the time. But I was gratified in the recent upfront meetings. The cable companies are making a lot of noise about this, the cable channels. And they use this chart to illustrate what we mean by the advertising bubble. If you look at this chart, it's a little ugly. I'll explain it. On the left side, you'll see there's a orange line that goes down. That's the broadcast audience. So that broadcast audience in 1980 was 50% of the US households, and as you can see in 2011, it had dropped to about 25% of US households. The blue line is the amount advertisers have to spend to reach that audience, and as you can see, since 1980, that's gone up fourfold. The CPM, the average day part CPM for TV has gone up fourfold. So we're selling a smaller audience for more, and somehow magically the big commercial broadcasters managed to increase the amount they get paid. So we're selling less for more every single year. My argument is that can't sustain indefinitely. At some point that's going to come to an end when advertisers start to demand something more for their money. So the way television has kind of affected our broader media landscape is that we've had many decades now of consolidation, where 6 major corporations own 90% of the TV assets in the United States. And here are 4 of them. The list of channels they have is actually so long, I couldn't fit them all on the screen. I couldn't include Disney or CBS. I just didn't have enough room to show this graphic. But what I thought was interesting is after many decades of consolidation, these giant media conglomerates are entirely dependent on pay television for their profits. Look at how much of their operating profit comes from pay TV, not from broadcasting, not from their movie studios, not from games, licensed products, theme parks, and all the other many businesses that they happen to be in. These companies are basically pay TV businesses. They're entirely dependent. And so if that lock gets unpicked and that cash box gets opened, these companies are in severe jeopardy. And they're keenly aware of it. That's why they're fighting so hard to preserve the pay TV ecosystem right now. Of course, they're under a lot of pressure. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure to change. The pressure to change comes from many different directions. It comes from companies that wish to compete with them. It comes from companies that wish to sell new technology. It comes from consumers themselves who want to seek out alternatives. There's a tremendous number of forces at work here. Let me show you. You know, the living room is kind of a competitive battleground, and in a way it always has been. You know, in the last 30 or 40 years, you've had this dynamic where broadcast has to fend off the constant assault of the cable channels who've been nipping away and growing and getting an ever-growing piece of that advertising pie. Of course, there's always some friction between the different distributors as they compete for subscribers, cable, satellite, and now telco TV. And of course, the channels, the companies that provide the channels, they have these acrimonious renewal disputes with their distributors periodically. When the time comes for them to renew, they always want more money. Distributors never want to pay it. So none of this is new. This has been a part of the TV landscape forever. TV's always been a very lively, competitive ecosystem. Now we have changed the way we consume programming. So in terms of the shows, well, the shows kind of compete with each other in a new way as well. They're not all shown the same way in pattern anymore because we have scheduled programming competing for attention with on-demand. And we also have time-shifted programming on our DVRs, and that's competing with live viewing. So the programs kind of compete for people's attention. Then, of course, television, the whole TV business, is competing in a way with the internet. Some people say this is like TV versus YouTube, which is a shorthand for that, but it's not entirely inaccurate. YouTube represents half of the video that's shown on the internet today. So, of course, YouTube and all those internet companies are trying to take a piece of the advertising business from television. And actually, we're starting to see, just yesterday in the Journal, that's starting to happen. So some big advertisers, some of the big media buyers are starting to shift their budgets towards digital video. We're starting to see real evidence of that. And then most recently, what we started to see is a proliferation of new gizmos in the living room that enable people to time shift programs and to shift the programs to different devices so they can watch what they want to watch, when they want to watch it. This means that the TV manufacturers also have some challenges. They're competing against mobile devices. For the first time ever, your mobile device is a way to access video, download it, pay for it, and then you can beam that to the television set through an Apple TV or a DLNA box. And so that means people now have a second way to get paid programming onto their television that bypasses that set-top box from the cable or satellite company. Of course, all these other gizmos, these OTT boxes and your game consoles, your Sony PlayStations, your Xbox, they compete with smart television. So people are trying to make different ways for people to make it very easy for people to put internet content on their television set. A lot of manufacturers are competing in that space. And then, of course, the content companies, they don't necessarily like this idea, so they resist it, so there's some friction there as well. So I've just taken you through a bunch of different competitive dynamics, but we can boil all of this stuff down to a long-term trend that is not going to change, a long-term trend that looks like this. A gradually more and more empowered audience that has the power to decide what they want to watch and where they want to watch it, and they're in friction, they're in a tenuous relationship, maybe a combative relationship with programmers who would like to get them to sit down at 8 o'clock and tune in to their show and stay on that channel all night long. So that's really at the heart of this. A lot of technology companies and other providers are trying to equip that consumer to be even more empowered in their consumption of television. And I would argue that the rate of digital media innovation continues to accelerate. You know, the internet never sleeps. The internet is constantly, chronically, constantly changing and improving. It's such a brutal Darwinian battlefield, the internet, that it forces people to be innovative in order to survive. But if you compare that to TV, I think I can assert with some certainty that television stopped innovating a decade ago. If you think of the biggest changes in TV in the last 10 years, they're the DVD, the DVR, high-definition TV. These are all 10 years old or more. You might say, well, 3D TV, but that didn't work out so well for the TV industry, so I wouldn't include it in that. There hasn't really been any significant change in the TV business in the past 10 years. So TV has kind of given up on the idea of changing how it does business. And I think that's a real problem for the television industry. We've kind of lost that competitive muscle. We've let that atrophy. We've let the internet companies develop much stronger muscles for competition. We saw this recently at CES in the beginning of the year, in January. At CES, we saw a number of announcements about content, which is kind of interesting because it's a hardware show, right? Consumer electronics show. But we saw a number of announcements. For instance, the WWE said that they're going to abandon pay TV and start to launch their own streaming channel, direct to consumers. People will subscribe. And they were very clear about their economics. They said with 1 million subscribers, we break even. With 2 million subscribers, we're going to be wildly profitable. And they felt very confident about the 2 million number. They felt like they would achieve that. Now, you might look at that and say, well, that's niche programming. That's a very core fan base that's very committed. Fine, that may be true. There were several other announcements like this. GoPro, the company that makes those little helmet cameras for skydivers and skiers and so on, they announced that they're going to launch their own channel as well. There were a number of announcements with the Xbox. They're doing a whole bunch of original programming. Amazon Prime had a number of announcements. So CES kind of became a show where content companies were talking about all the cool new digital programming that they had for these new digital gizmos that were on display there. But the company that really won, that really dominated, was Netflix, very quietly, with a single announcement. You know, last year in 2013, Netflix kind of stunned the TV industry because they were nominated for 14 Emmys. I was so stunned that when I got my voting package, I couldn't even take a photograph of it steadily. It's a blurry photograph because I was having a hard time grokking the idea that an internet company was trying to win Primetime Emmy Awards, TV awards. And of course, they won 2 of them. So what Netflix told us in 2013 is that they can produce TV programming at the exact same level of quality as the regular TV companies, HBO and the companies that they consider their competition. And that was a real wake-up call for the television industry in Los Angeles. For a long time, my colleagues in broadcast television have been operating under the assumption that somehow TV is superior to the internet programming, and somehow television programming would never be challenged in any serious way by the internet. And what Netflix did was they disproved that irrevocably once and for all. And of course, from now on, from this point forward, we're going to start to see more and more internet companies claiming and vying for those Emmy Awards. They're going to compete with television and the quality of the programming. But that's not all. At CES, what Netflix announced is that they will be the first to stream 4K ultra-high-definition video to the home. Today, there's no broadcast system on the planet that can distribute a 4K signal. There's no satellite system that will ever do it. They could, but it would be economically infeasible. There's no cable system that can deliver 4K. Now, this is a chilling message for TV companies, because it means that what's going to start to happen beginning this year is that consumers at home that watch Netflix, they're going to start to see a qualitatively better image and great programming. And gradually, that old cable channel signal, that super compressed high definition signal, it's not really high def, it's sort of like a close approximation of it that we can squish through a cable system, that's going to start to look kind of like VHS tape. It's not going to look as good compared to Netflix. And we're going to start to see a quality gap happen. And of course, you better believe it, Netflix, Amazon, all of these companies are going to push that as far as they possibly can to distinguish their wares from what we would probably start calling old TV or old pay TV. They're going to start to show that their stuff is not just qualitatively better in terms of content, it'll also be qualitatively better in terms of the signal that's sent to the home. I think this is a real wake-up call for the TV industry. So let's talk about the future. 2020, it's only 6 years away. It's not a very long time. A lot can change in 5 years, 6 years' time. And the question is, what will TV be like then? It's a hard question to answer. As I mentioned, a lot of variables going on right now. So I looked around. Glenn Britt, the former head of Time Warner Cable, he said, look, there's no such thing as a TV anymore. It's just a video display device. And this is kind of the logic that led us to the initiative called TV Everywhere, putting video on all these different screens, trying to extend the cable ecosystem out to different devices. Robert Kinsella, the head of content at YouTube, predicts with great confidence that in just a few years, 90% of the data streamed over the internet will consist of video. He's not wrong. Today, YouTube and Netflix together account for 50% of the video bandwidth in the United States during prime time. So he's not wrong. That's probably going to happen. That's probably a very accurate estimate. So we'll see a lot more video on the internet and a lot higher quality bitrate. David Karp, the founder of Tumblr, which was recently bought by Yahoo, he said 5 years from now, I expect the majority of the content that we watch not to be produced by a small handful of creators who are selected and supported by studios, but he envisions it being created by the users themselves. And he has 170 million active users in his network at Tumblr, so he has some credibility on this subject, I think. One way to think about this question in the future, we try to envision 2020. It's a little hard to predict what might happen. Let's look back just a few years to 2006. It's really not that long ago if you think about it. So 2006. Now, in your mind, think who were the leading companies in the media ecosystem? Who were the most innovative, the most dominant companies in the new media ecosystem? Have you got a couple of names in mind? Here they are. These are the companies that were the leaders in 2006. Vodafone, MySpace, Electronic Arts, Microsoft, and Nokia. Think about how far these companies have fallen, how fast they've fallen from their lofty perch just 7 or 8 years ago. It's really quite extraordinary, isn't it? Remember, back in 2006, there was no iPhone. Apple was just a maker of a small number of computers. They were a little tiny company. They had the iPod. But really, it wasn't a very significant player in media even at that time. Facebook was for college kids. It existed, but it was just for college kids. It was called the Facebook at that time. It's really quite extraordinary. There was no Angry Birds. There were no mobile games that were of huge numbers at that point. Nokia was the dominant provider of smartphones. Think about that, how far they've fallen in such a short period of time. Since 2006, we've seen the introduction of 4 different classes of media technology that have transformed the media landscape. The first one is the mobile phone. It's the most important thing for you to pay attention to. If you take one thing away from this talk today, I want you to go back and reconsider everything you're doing for mobile. Start to look at your entire program lineup and everything that you do in terms of outreach to your members, subscribers, and think about the mobile phone as the first point of contact for them. This is the fastest growing media platform in the world. It's growing at an extraordinary rate, and none of this existed in its present form back in 2006. The second thing is streaming media. Of course, we had streaming media in 2006, but it was small stuff. YouTube was small stuff. It was like pirated video, and, clips that weren't really meant to be posted and so forth. We've had a proliferation of video services, and as I just pointed out, they're getting very good very, very quickly. The quality is going up. Facebook, Twitter, all these social services, they existed, but in kind of a primitive state, the embryonic state. The great big breakout of Facebook really started to happen after 2008 and 2009, 2010. So it's grown significantly since then. But now, even at 2010, they were only at 100 million people. Now they've got 1.3 billion members. And this last piece, crowdfunding, crowd curation, crowd discovery, these are entirely new things. These are ways for the crowd to participate in a meaningful way, not just in watching content, but participate in the creation of it, even the funding of it. This phenomenon did not exist in 2006 in any significant way. So these are big changes. So when we think about just the future of TV 5 or 6 years from now, it's hard to predict because no one could have anticipated these things happening and making the profound impact on the media landscape that they made just 5 or 6 years ago in the past. So I think what's happening, all these new devices are changing us. Certainly the mobile phone changes your expectation of how content works. Let me explain what I mean by that. How many people in the room really expect our kids to watch TV the way we did? We're sitting there like couch potatoes, stuffing our faces with potato chips and so forth. Does anyone really think kids are going to do that? Sit there passively in front of a television set watching in-pattern, linear, scheduled programming on an old-fashioned set-top box. It feels sort of like a Victrola at this point, this old clunky thing in your house. And you've got all these cool digital gizmos vying for your attention. I think it's unlikely. That's why Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, He says when he walks into his living room, he feels like he's gone back in time 20 or 30 years. That's kind of a chilling concept, but certainly for people under the age of 30, that is exactly their experience. They look at TV and they're like, I don't really get it. Why do you watch this? Why do you do this? There have been 3 generations of TV viewers. Many of the folks in this room are the baby boomers, right? So with the baby boomers, we got color TV, we got the movie of the week. That was a big deal when it first came out. We got the first multi-channel TV, pay TV, and we also got the VCR, right? Those were great big innovations for their day. And then Generation X, they got all the digital toys, the DVD, the DVR, they've got VOD, they got much bigger packages on satellite TV, and they got BitTorrent, so they could actually rip video and download it themselves and so forth. File sharing was a big thing for them. The group I want you to pay attention to is the millennials, because their experience of TV is so profoundly different from what we grew up with and what we experienced as kids. Because they get to make TV. They have services like YouTube that allow them to produce and share video. They have messaging services like Skype, Vine, Instagram, Uvu, and thousands more video messaging services that enable them to create and send messages, disposable video. Their perception of what video is, we think of it as this priceless artifact, this thing that's precious, something that goes in a library, it has archival value. They view it as a disposable thing. They're going to do a Vine, it's a 6-second video, and then they delete it. Completely different attitude towards video. For them, video is something you mess around with. You mess around with it a little bit and you share it with your friends and then you throw it away and you move on. Completely different mindset. And for them, they don't really perceive the distinctions. When you ask millennials about television, they don't really get what the difference between NBC, CBS, and ABC versus, say, cable channels like TNT and so forth. They just see them as on the same continuum. They're all channels. They don't really get the distinction between broadcasting and pay TV. And now what's happening is these internet services have gotten so good, services like Netflix are beginning to erode the distinction between television and the internet. So for them, TV is all this stuff. It's just one big continuum. They don't see the distinction. I know many of the people in the room probably think of TV as one thing and the internet as another, but that distinction is being eroded very quickly among your viewership, particularly the younger group. And the most important thing to know about this audience is they're not passive. The passive viewer, that's something of the past. What we need to prepare ourselves for is the engaged, activated audience, and that's really what I want to direct your attention to today. There's a whole generation now that grew up with broadband in their home. Always on, always available broadband. Information as a utility that you can get anytime. And for that generation, WWW, well, that doesn't stand for the World Wide Web. It stands for whatever, whenever, and wherever, because that's their expectation on media. They grew up with the understanding that they have the power to shift the programming to any device of their choosing, to watch programming whenever they want to watch it, however they want to watch it. This is incredibly vexing for programmers, because everything we've been trained to do is to control the audience and get them to sit down on the couch at 8 o'clock and stay tuned in for the rest of the night. Our entire system is set up for that. And that's how we've been trained to think. We have to think in a different way. We have to start to think like this customer about making our content available everywhere, on demand, to serve that audience. We have to be on the platforms where our audience is. And as Ira pointed out just a minute ago, even with 70-year-old people like his mom, if you don't provide the content in a way that they can get to it easily and legally, they're going to find their own way of getting it. It isn't that hard, folks, to BitTorrent. It's pretty doggone easy. This generation has grown up, and they have an entirely different expectation of how the world is going to respond to them. So a generation that grew up with the internet now is starting to flex their muscles, and they're starting to take to the streets, and they're using digital media to communicate. We've seen evidence of this in the last few years around the world, where these spontaneous self-organizing groups come forth to air their protests, to air their grievances, and they're very clear about how they're communicating with each other. They're telling us exactly where to find them and how they talk to each other. Every time you see a photo from a place like Tahrir Square, or most recently Taksim Square in Istanbul, you see people with their cell phones and with their camera phones, and they're taking pictures. They're recording this incident, and they're sharing it with their friends who are somewhere else. And just the first weekend of those demonstrations that happened in Tahrir Square in Egypt 2 years ago, 23 million photos were uploaded on the internet. I did the search after 2 days of that demonstration. 23 million photos were uploaded. People are using these tools to produce content at a tremendous pace. This device, this mobile phone, is the primordial threat for the TV industry. You need to pay more attention to it, because in the hands of an empowered customer, it gives them the ability not just to shift your programming around, but to create and share their own programming. This is a diagram that shows the number of photographs taken each year since photographs were introduced in the 1820s. So over here, 1826, 0. Over here at this end, 2011, 380 billion photos were taken. 380 billion photos. Now that pink line that drops off, that's analog. That's chemical film. Of course, you can see it's just tapered off to practically nothing. 4 billion photos. 350 billion photos. They say that most of the photos ever taken on Earth were taken in the last 3 years. the vast majority of photos ever taken. We're growing up as the most documented society ever in history. This diagram shows all the photos, or the 4 sites that have a lot of photos. That microscopic red dot down here in the corner, that's the Library of Congress, which has the largest collection of photos that exist in printed out form. This little box here, that's Instagram. This box here is Flickr, which used to be the biggest photo sharing site, but Facebook dominates now. Facebook has a total of 250 billion photos uploaded. We're using our mobile phones to upload selfies all the time. I just did it with Ira before we got on stage here. Every 60 seconds, we're creating a tremendous amount of media. 350,000 photos are uploaded to Facebook every minute, 700,000 status updates, 700,000 searches on Google, 125,000 tweets, and 2.4 million emails are sent. But for the TV people, this is the stat you need to pay attention to. This diagram shows you how much video has been uploaded to YouTube every hour. Every minute. It's hours of video uploaded every minute to YouTube. And as you can see, a few years ago, 2007, 8 hours of video was being uploaded every minute. That's a lot. But now it's a staggering 100 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every single minute of the day. More video is uploaded to YouTube in a month than all 3 major broadcast networks have aired since their inception in the 1940s. Every month, YouTube collects more video than all the television that was aired in broadcast TV for the last 40 years. So in 2011, YouTube blew through some amazing numbers. 1 trillion views, 4 billion views a month, 1.2 hours of video uploaded every second. We're about to cross an important threshold where 3 billion people on the planet are wired for the internet. So at some point, the UN says that by the end of this year, 3 billion humans on the planet. So it's about a third of humanity that'll be connected to the internet. As you can see from this diagram, we've lit up some parts of the globe, and other parts of the globe we've barely even begun to scratch the surface. It's also estimated that by 2025, there'll be 6 billion people on the internet. They'll all be connecting through their mobile phones. When I talk to TV companies that I work with today, I try to explain to them that the tablet's not a TV, and they all say, yeah, Rob, we get that. We understand it's not a television. That is not news. But what is news to them is when I say, it's actually better than a television. This kind of gets a reaction from them, right? You can imagine, right? Their view is TV. It's the best screen in the house, and it is. But think about it from a consumer's perspective. From a consumer's perspective, they make a choice like this. They already have a TV, right? Everybody's got a TV in the United States. So their decision is, should I get a new flat screen that's going to hang on my wall and be used maybe 4 hours a day? Or should I get a tablet that I can take with me? And that tablet is incredibly versatile because, of course, it's not just a TV set. It's also a game player and a music player and a photo-taking thing and a photo-sharing thing. You can read books on it. You can share books on it. And it's not just for the consumption of content. You can also create content on that tablet. You can publish every kind of content, text messaging, multimedia messaging, video, audio. I was in Hong Kong and I visited the Polytechnic University there. And as I was walking around, we passed these recording studios where they teach students how to mix and score music. And they're beautiful facilities, big rooms, great equipment there. And they were vacant. They were all empty. And I walked by, I said, well, what's going on? Why isn't anyone using these incredible recording facilities? And the professor I was walking with, he said, oh, they all have that iPad app. We've replaced all that stuff with the iPad. There's an app you can download. This is what's happening now. So people are able to get actual professional-grade equipment, the equivalent of what was millions of dollars equipment installed at a university or in a broadcast facility, in a post facility, and that can now be replicated by a $10 app on an iPad. It's astonishing, the power that we're giving to people to express themselves. The new generation growing up with tablets is experiencing the world in an even more radically different fashion than the people who use broadband internet. People are using the generation that grew up with a computer in the home. This new generation has a tablet. Now, how many people have had this experience where you give a 4-year-old kid a tablet and just watch what happens? Has anyone done it? Raise your hand if you have. I'm going to look out. Yeah, okay, so quite a few folks. That's great. Okay, so you probably have had this experience. If you give a child a computer, a child who can't read or write, a computer, they get a little bit flummoxed because their hands aren't big enough for the keyboard, they can't spell, the commands are kind of obscure. So kids aren't really that great with using a computer. They can click a mouse, but they can't really use the keyboard. Well, with a tablet, it's totally different. With a tablet, in 5 minutes, a little kid can figure out how to use a tablet really quickly. And it's kind of fun to watch because they touch the icons. As soon as they get a response, they're like, ooh. And now they want to touch all the icons, right? And they start launching all kinds of apps. It's actually fun to see. So in about 5 minutes, they figure it out. And after about a half an hour, they've really mastered the tablet. And then the next thing that 4-year-old does is actually quite chilling. Because a 4-year-old will put the tablet down and walk across the room to the television set and start to reach up to that flat screen TV, and they swipe and they touch, and nothing happens. And then they turn to their mother and they say, Mom, I'm broken. That's how this generation looks at television. This generation is growing up looking at TV as something that's busted. We need to respond to that. We need to get ahead of that change. TV needs really to take Steve Jobs' advice and start to think different, but for too long we've been thinking the same. I argue we should think disruptive. We should start to look at the blind spots in our business, the areas that we're not focused on. Those are the areas for the biggest opportunity for us. Brian Roberts at Comcast said we need to make the television feel as relevant as these other new devices that are coming along, and I think he's going to do that in the wrong way. I don't think he's going to be terribly successful, because when he wants to make it feel as relevant, he doesn't mean he wants to make it as compelling and as empowering and as life-changing as a tablet. Of course not. He wants to make a device that replicates some of that functionality, but it's crippled just enough to keep people locked into a pay TV ecosystem, and I don't think that's going to work very well. I think consumers are too smart for that. Technology changes us. It doesn't just change media, it transforms us as people. It teaches us new habits, and it gives us new expectations. My argument to you today is that engagement is the new entertainment. When I worked for Oprah Winfrey, this is what I learned from her, best of all. She always focuses on service. Every meeting starts with this question from her. It's very seriously meant. How is this going to serve our audience? Not how is it going to make a bunch of money or how is it going to make us more successful. She doesn't care about that. She's not motivated by that. How are we going to serve our audience? And when I thought about this talk, I thought about that immediately. Because I was like, you know, there's one other group in the television industry that focuses on serving a community. It's the PBS stations. The PBS stations are focused on local community service. Yes, yes, you are. And you should be very proud of that, because your colleagues in the pay TV and the commercial broadcasting business, they've abandoned their community responsibilities. They've left their communities behind. They really have. So have the commercial radio stations. They don't even have local stations in many cases now. They're just syndicating a stream out. But I urge you to reconsider how you engage with your audience. I think there's some ways to change the way you engage with people. You know, a lot of times we look at social media, we think it's very trivial because people are liking and sharing. It seems sort of silly, right? It does seem sort of silly. But there's something underlying that activity that explains why so many people find it incredibly compelling. Remember, half the people on the internet are on Facebook right now, and they're liking and sharing and following and posting and so forth. So they all have one thing in common, which is validation. When you post something and someone likes it, you feel great. You feel great. When you post a photo and somebody comments on it, you feel awesome about that, right? We've all had that experience. It's like a drug. In fact, it's better than a drug, because everybody lives alone. We're all in our heads. We all live these lives of quiet desperation. We don't really know what the world thinks of us. But when you go on Facebook and you get that big thumbs up, you feel fantastic. It's addictive. It's like a drug. You want more of it. I want more validation. And what the broadcasting industry has missed is that this is a great opportunity for us. We don't validate our audiences. We never listen to our audiences. We talk at them. It's a little bit like the speech. I'm talking at you. I'm not really giving you a chance to talk back to me. But we should do that more. We should cultivate that habit more. We should listen more. The question for you today is, how can you use social media validation to put the public back into public broadcasting? What an incredible opportunity. Nobody else in the TV ecosystem is going to focus on this but you guys. That's what the local TV stations have the opportunity to do. It's an enormous opportunity. Let me give you a couple points about this as a closer here. The point I'm trying to make is that you're much more than TV. You're the best of both worlds, digital and broadcasting. TV gives you the best reach, the best video, the best awareness, no question about it. That's not going to change, as I told you earlier. That's not going to change. But the internet, that gives you a great way to connect with people, to engage with them, and extract really useful data about what's working and what isn't. And the digital team here at PBS is fully equipped to do that. I just had a briefing with them about their ability to measure and track user behavior across platforms. They're eager to share that with the station groups. Please, I urge you to take advantage of that. And there's one more thing you need to understand, you need to take away from this. Earlier in the beginning of the talk, I talked about all the bogus news reports you get on the internet, how you need to be a little skeptical about that. Public broadcasting brings one thing that no one else can challenge. You are unquestionably the best at trust. You have trust that no one else has. Audiences believe in PBS. They believe so much in PBS that they're willing to part with their hard-earned cash and become subscriber members of these stations. That's a powerful endorsement. They're voting with their dollars to tell you how much they trust your brands. Use that trust. Now start to engage people into a trusted dialogue. Make room in your programming, in your plans. Make room for the 3 billion who are participating, who crave the opportunity to participate with you. Make room in your programming for them. Think of them in different roles. You can cast the people in your audience the same way you cast actors in a show. You give them precise roles. You tell them what to do. There's many ways to participate. You're limited only by your imagination. If you have someone who comments a lot, great, make them a moderator in your message room, your message boards. If you have someone who wants to contribute content, great, you can make them a correspondent. You can deputize your audience and give them ways to participate meaningfully. The message this week here is think local. And I would say think less about broadcasting and more about deep casting. Go into those issues that are at the heart of your community. That's where you're going to find the most engagement. And apart from local newspapers, no one's really doing this. It's a wide open opportunity. Think about crowdfunding. You guys are the original crowdfunders, right? You do these subscription drives, and so you understand the principles of crowdfunding. What I just learned a minute ago is that PBS Digital team has an expert on crowdfunding. He's already run 6 successful campaigns for PBS stations across the country. Crowdfunding is growing so quickly. More than $6 billion has been raised in crowdfunding. And surprisingly, it's not all about media. It's not all about video games and people that want to make movies. You hear about those stories, of course. But if civic crowdfunding were its own category on Kickstarter, it would be the biggest category by far. So local communities are banding together to solve problems. Some of them are mundane, like potholes. Some of them are gargantuan, like they're trying to fix bridges with the crumbling infrastructure and the lack of investment in infrastructure. Communities are starting to organize themselves. This is a great place for the PBS stations to galvanize local communities. Galvanize them. Use your platform as a way to bring that audience in and get them engaged in local community issues. Start conversations, not just streams of media going out, but a two-way dialogue. That's what this platform enables. And again, I would say most of my colleagues in the television industry, the commercial TV industry, they're very bad at this. They're not great at listening to their audience. Develop that capability. You have that opportunity. And finally, I want to make a comment about education because I believe so strongly in education. When I worked for Oprah, we ran the world's largest live educational programs on the internet. This works. People crave it. People love it. And the whole time we were doing these shows with the great speakers that Oprah could bring in and her great wisdom and credibility. The whole time we were doing it, I was thinking back to Wayne Dyer and those programs that he did for PBS. And in the process, helped PBS stations raise $400 million. People crave education. The broadcasting companies have relinquished their opportunity to educate. They've cored out their newsrooms. They've ceased their mission, their social mission of educating. And they're focused purely on entertainment. We're awash in entertainment. We have too many entertainment choices. What we need is to equip our citizens with the skills to be smart, informed decision makers in the 21st century. And so I'm so very impressed by the Kentucky Educational TV Group. What they're doing is profoundly important, not just in reaching out to school children, but also to middle schools. The PBS system is the only group in the country that's developing multimedia for middle schools. That's a huge achievement. You should be very proud of that. PBS is reaching out to prisoners. Yes, PBS is reaching out and helping prisoners get an education and learn how to read. That's a profound accomplishment. It costs us money to warehouse people who don't have the skills to operate in society. We have an obligation as citizens to train our fellow citizens. These are great missions for PBS that are totally distinct from the economics and the turmoil that face the commercial broadcasting business. New media causes us to reconsider our old attitudes, and I want to encourage you to rethink everything. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention today. It's a pleasure and privilege to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Rob.
You're welcome.
We're done.
Okay.
Big hand for Rob Tercek. Thank you.